This is Tim Bingham again.
Hello, sir. How are you today?
Well, I'm anxious. I decided to get a ride rather than use the GPS for tomorrow, but I still wanted to work on my fear of the GPS, and I was thinking last night as I went to sleep that what I'm most afraid of is the fear itself. I'm not so worried about the driving or the GPS, but what I'm afraid of is that I will, when I get down to it, I will be panicked and afraid. And so I'd like to do a worksheet on fear of the fear. Does that make sense?
Well, it might. What's the outcome? What's the thought you have about what's beyond the fear if you let yourself feel the fear, other than just, if I walk outside on a cool, breezy day, I'm going to feel the cool air, right? It's going to be a change from my nice, warm house.
Right.
So there's an energy that I experience that is the cool, breezy air. And in truth, that's what fear is. It's an energy. It's a set of sensations that I've experienced many, many times in my life. So the fear can't be of that energy. The fear must be that I'm projecting into my mind some really unpleasant consequence that's going to follow if I let myself experience that energy. So if you step into this and ask yourself, what's the question? What's the picture beyond feeling the fear?
The picture beyond the feeling of the fear is that with the panic, I will become paralyzed and I won't be able to function. That's as far as my 9-bit mind can fathom it, is that the fear of the fear is the fear of panic and the inability to function.
So is there a history in your personal life or in your immediate family of people who've been so frozen with fear that they haven't been able to function?
No.
And is it possible that you have an ancestor not too far removed who had a situation where they were frozen in fear and it led to them some really horrible negative consequences?
I don't know of anybody. And I have never been that way myself. I have had the panic, but I worked through it and I came through it okay. But it still comes up in my mind when I think of the GPS, using the GPS tomorrow. I picture getting in the car with the GPS and then getting panicked about using it. And that's as far as my mind takes the scenario. That is the terror that I feel is focused. The terror is the fear of the fear. And I don't know of anyone in my family who's had that, nor have I experienced that. I've been in a situation where I was panicked, but I managed to work through it. But the thought of it coming up again led me to get a ride to the party that I'm going to tomorrow. rather than face that fear of the fear. I know that's vague and it's hard to work with, but that's where I'm stuck.
So have you done any worksheets so far on this, on your fear of the fear?
No.
Okay. And is the reason
I'd
for
like
that
to.
because your schedule is so busy that there just wasn't any time, or is there something in you that's blocking you from doing that worksheets?
Well, I just thought about the fear of the fear last night, and so far this morning I haven't had the time to work on it, but I'd be happy to work on it now.
Okay, what about the concept of what's going to happen at the party? Do you have a set of thoughts about what would happen if you walked into the party and everybody there found out that you were terrified of using the GPS and that's why you had to ask for a ride?
No, but I'm afraid that if I drove myself there that I would be focused during the party on the fear of driving back and that the GPS might conk out on me, my phone might run out of juice, or something else bad would happen which will interfere with using the GPS on the way home, and then when I get in the car on the way home, I'd have that panic again, and I'd be focused on that throughout much of the party.
Okay, so what will it mean about you as a person if you have panic and fear?
What will it mean as me as
about
a person?
About you as a person.
About me. As I contemplate it now, I don't feel any particular judgment because the panic is so strong. I don't feel like a wimp or a klutz.
Are you saying the panic is there right now?
No. No, it isn't there now. But I'm imagining it.
I'm going to turn on the microphone for Susan Bingham, who had a comment. Susan?
Yeah, Tim Bingham and Tim Hayes. I don't know if this is relevant, but Tim Bingham, you've forgotten a couple of really important things that I think ought to be factored in here. One was that you did become paralyzed. And we were in Salem, remember? And you were absolutely catatonic with anxiety. And we took you to the hospital. And you had electroshock. I don't think you exactly worked through the panic. The electroshock gave you some relief, but it also did some other things. And before that, as a younger man, when I first knew you, you would talk to me about how terrified you were of the fact that you would become so panicked that you would end up in a mental hospital. And you did have a grandfather who was in a mental hospital. It was for Alzheimer's, I know, but I don't know. You were so close to that grandfather that I don't know whether Bapa figures into this or not, but it just came to mind. I hope I'm not meddling too much, but when you said it never happened, there was never anybody, or you never became paralyzed, you actually did go through that.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't remember that far back.
How far
20
back?
years ago. It was 20 years ago.
More than 20, much more.
Yeah.
Let's see, how old were the kids? I guess the kids were pretty grown, so let's see. It might have been 1985. 1985 to 1990, that's a rough guess. In any case, there was and that ended your career pretty much as a lawyer, because what those electroshocks did to you was take away your short-term memory and wipe out a kind of edge you had as a lawyer, especially your writing. Suddenly you couldn't write briefs anymore. You had to get you to bring them home and let me look at them, but then you thought that was cheating or something for me to suggest reorganizing. Your ideas were fine, but you didn't know how to put them down on paper anymore. Dr. Tim Bingham is a lefty, and they surmise his reactions to the electroshock were atypical. He was very impacted by them. He was relieved of terrible anxiety for a while, but they took away some of his capabilities, and he had to really kind of relearn the law, which I wonder if that is part of the association of the panic now, is that you were hurt, and then you got help, which hurt you. This is really, really profound stuff, but the GPS business is just the tip of an iceberg that I think is huge here. And Dr. Tim, if you have any idea how to do a worksheet with all that material, that would be great. But
yeah, I wasn't lying about the. I haven't been paralyzed by panic for 25 years, but you're right, Sue. I did go through that episode with electroshock treatments. Maybe the panic now has to do with that.
Well,
so
you
take
had
a breath
this
or two,
attraction.
Tim. Take a breath or two, Tim, and see what happens when you sit with the idea for a mind shifter that says it's safe and healing for me, and I love it when I have to start over from scratch. What do you notice?
Nothing.
So the idea that when you had the electric shock that was supposed to help you, and it basically meant you had to relearn the law all over again. That's not part of your terror, about the terror?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mute myself. I forgot. Sorry.
So what is your thought? What's resonating for you when you hear Susan talk about these memories, both the grandfather and your own trauma with anxiety and the shocks?
Well, I don't think my grandfather was, he was put in the hospital at the end. He was 80-something and he had Alzheimer's. I don't think that's comparable to what I'm been going through. As for the memory of the electroshock, it was the treatments themselves were rather pleasant, actually. And so I remember it. And the relearning of the law wasn't unpleasant. I just was at home in my study and would read through the statutory books, and I practiced law for another 15 years afterwards. Sue thinks that ruined my writing. I'm not convinced that that's true. But I have had panic feelings. Sue, were the electroshock treatments after the kids had grown and were left the house?
I'm not sure if Jonathan wasn't still home. I could look it up.
I remember driving back from the movies with the kids on 95 and having panic attacks on the road and having to just gut it out. So I guess that was before the treatments.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so I have had, you're right to bring that up, Sue. I have had periods where I was immobilized.
And you were terrified of being you were attracted to the idea of all pressure taken off of you so that you could go to a mental hospital, but you were terrified of going to a mental hospital at the same time. I remember we talked about it quite a lot. That was your worst fantasy, is you're going to end up in a mental institution.
Right.
After the electroshock, you didn't talk that way anymore. You never talked about that.
Sue, clarify. He didn't talk about what after the electroshock?
Being afraid of being in a mental hospital.
Okay, so the terror he had about that was before the incident?
Yeah.
With the shock?
Yeah. 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 And also, Tim Bingham, do you remember that I would be taking you to get the electroshocks, and you thought I was doing something to hurt you? Remember how you asked me? Do you remember that? Are you trying to hurt me, you said. I think you weren't sure that this was good for you, and you were right. I've regretted going along with the doctor's recommendation of having you have those. But you thought I was trying to hurt you, and I told you that I was not, and I promised you, and you believed me, and that was the end of that. But that shocked me that something about the treatments seemed so dark to you that you would ask a question like that.
So what are you feeling, Tim, right now?
I'm feeling that this panic has been with me most of my adult life, and I feel badly about it. I'd like to get to the bottom of it. I'm ashamed of those shock treatment, that I had to have shock treatment. I'm ashamed of that. And the panic that I have now is like the panic then. It's the same fear of the fear, panic.
Okay, so I would recommend either the MindShifter on the idea of how it's safe and healing for me to be so flooded with anxious energy that I'm not able to function, or that I lose all control. One of those words, that I can't function, that phrase, that I can't function, or the phrase that I lose all control. Those could be good targets for mind shifters. And
okay, it is safe and healing
for me
for
to
what?
Be so flooded,
for me.
To be so flooded with emotional energy or anxious energy, whichever word resonates more.
With anxious energy.
That I lose all control and I cannot function.
Okay.
Did you write that down?
Yeah, I'm writing it down.
So when you're done writing it down, read it back if you would, and let me know how it feels to read that.
It is safe and healing for me to be so flooded with anxious energy that I lose all control and I cannot function.
What's your response to that? What gets stirred up in you when you read that?
It's scary to think that the panic now is like the panic then. It's a scary thought because then it means I really might end up without being able to do it, being frozen, being out of control with anxiety. So it brings up anxiety about the anxiety.
Okay, but now notice you're externalizing it as though it is something that is causing your emotions. And let's just pay attention to the fact that with your talking about it and Susan talking about it, something from your past that you were not thinking about at the beginning of this call has now been bubbled up to your conscious level of awareness.
Right.
And so you might do worksheets on the fact that you hold fear or terror about having another episode or having to be hospitalized or having to have electroshock therapy again. And that's really what all of this is about. That's a deeper level about any of these things, whether it's walking toward the treadmill and feeling anxiety, or thinking about using the GPS when I'm driving someplace. Whenever I'm going to engage in an activity that might move me toward anxious thoughts, or thoughts that resonate this memory of this fearful energy from the past, deep down there underneath all of this baggage hiding it is this terror that I'm going to have another hospitalization, that I'm going to have electroshock therapy, that I'm going to shut down so much I can't function. And so I want to dismantle the energy around that trauma. So the prescription would be an endless number of worksheets around that series of events. Getting so immobilized with anxiety that you were hospitalized and that you went for electroshock treatments and that it had a very abrupt impact on you, and it made it so you couldn't write the way you used to, and you had to relearn the law. And so just that was a very traumatic episode in your life, and it's quite reasonable to assume that you're sitting on top of, that you're hiding from yourself a whole panoply of negative emotions and traumatic energies related to that trauma from your past that have never been touched. They've never been, much less dismantled, they've never been allowed back to the surface consciousness.
Yeah, I don't feel them now. But I'll do the MindShifter.
And you can do worksheets on your fear today that might happen again.
Yeah.
I, Tim, who am love and feeling fear. What's the trigger is my memory of having such a panicky breakdown that I had to get electroshock treatments. What's the thought I'm using to create that fear? If I let myself feel fear, it might happen again. I might lose all functioning. I might have to be hospitalized. I might have to have more electroshock. Any of those thoughts would be good for that worksheet in slot 1D. I would not expect that you're going to do one or two powerful worksheets and wipe this thing out. I would imagine, based on what you and Susan have just laid out, that this is a significant trauma. It wasn't just one afternoon I had a panic attack. It led to a prolonged series of treatments, and it led to a major disruption in your ability to function in your career, and it required that you relearn the law. So this was a series of traumas. And in each of those different little episodes and aspects, you most likely downloaded negative, false beliefs about yourself and the nature of the world being dangerous and your role in it being powerless, etc. And those are really good targets for either the MindShifter targeted journaling or the EFT breathing and tapping and or the reality management worksheets.
Okay. You're
and
right that I don't. No, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm right that what?
Right. You're right that I don't feel the horror of the going to the hospital and getting the treatments. It's kind of a blank. So I must have pushed those feelings down into the unconscious because I don't feel them.
Well, we know you pushed them down into the unconscious because you didn't even bring them to conscious awareness today. Susan did.
Right.
I asked you point blank if you'd had a time like that where you were paralyzed by fear, and you said no.
Right.
It was so blatant that you later on in the call said, now wait a minute, I wasn't lying.
Yeah.
Right? It was so fully blocked from your conscious awareness
right.
that it wasn't available until something on the outside jogged your memory.
Right.
Now, just so you know, that's the way it works for all of us. I don't know how much of the show you listened to yesterday before you called and asked for help with outlining a worksheet near the end of the show, but what I was talking about was that I was walking around, sassy and happy Tuesday morning, the great and powerful Dr. Tim, psychologist, happy in his own office, feeling like he's doing good work with patients. And then right before the show, I opened an email, and my mind revealed to me in the interpretation it put on that email that I've got a lot of fears about not being respected. I've got a lot of trauma from past events that I downloaded. I've got shame. I did worksheets on shame. I did worksheets on sadness. I did worksheets on anger. I did worksheets on righteous indignation. And I was not thinking that I had all of those worksheets to do when I was, seeing my first few patients Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
So the idea that you were walking around with this terror in you that you're unaware of is just the idea of what it's like to be in a human body. We all function that way. We all have things we hide from ourselves.
Yeah.
And the blessing is that with the use of these tools, we all have the capacity, once we learn these tools, to apply these tools and to start reaping the benefits of becoming more consciously aware of what we're carrying around in our energy system. You know, Paramahansa Yogananda said there is no such thing as the unconscious. You just have your consciousness. And there are parts of your consciousness that you're willing to look at and parts that you're not. And in the Western world, we've come to call that part of our consciousness, those things we've lived through, those beliefs we've downloaded, we've come to call that part that we are not willing to look at our unconscious. But it's all just experiences we've had. It's all just energies and thoughts and beliefs and traumas, and it's all there. And the essence of this work is that I apply these tools soon and often so that over time I can usher myself into the experience that it's perfectly safe for me to have my rage come up, or my terror come up, or my deep shame come up, like what was coming up for me on Tuesday morning. Because I can use these tools and keep my breath moving and let these energies flow and get a perspective that lets me see they're false. One of the bottom line observations, the last one to be added to my list of observations, is if I have a negative thought about myself or somebody else, or a negative emotion, I can instantly know three things. The first one is, it's an old tape playing. The next one is, it's false. And the last one is, if I take an action from it, I'm just going to make my current situation worse.
Mm-hmm.
So it's perfectly safe for you to do these worksheets. It's perfectly safe for you to do this MindShifter. It's perfectly safe for you to remember the fact that you've been hiding from yourself the terror of having your anxiety build to the point where you're completely immobilized. You've been hiding that terror from yourself ever since you had this trauma. And because you've got the support of Susan and the support of these tools, you have the opportunity, if you choose to do it, to demonstrate to yourself that it's perfectly safe for you to see all that at deeper and deeper levels.
Okay, well, I'll do the MindShifter and I'll do the worksheets.
Okay, any comments from you, Susan?
No, but I'm glad Tim came on the show because it never had occurred to me that his panic might be related to that panic, that ultimate panic that ended, in him having to go to the hospital. We always kept it rather immediate. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's really not about that. It's about the beliefs he downloaded through that series of events. And those beliefs are accessible. And those beliefs can be dismantled. Those meanings can be rewritten. And that's what we do every time we apply these tools.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's wonderful because now you've got the recording of this show and the things you've said, and Tim can see, he can listen back and he can remember, wow, before Susan said that, I didn't even remember that.
Yeah.
And so you can wake up at different levels to how thoroughly your mind was hiding this from you. So let's leave that there and give you a chance to work on that, and feel free to call back with results tomorrow or later today with the second hour. If that's an okay stopping point for the both of you, I will turn on another person's microphone to see if there are comments relevant to this conversation. Is that an all